China doesn't need America's permission to lead the world anymore, and it sure doesn't need oil like it used to. While the US was busy bombing the Middle East, pulling out of climate agreements, and blaming everyone else for global instability, China quietly installed more solar panels and wind turbines in 1 month than most countries manage in a year. And while missiles flew between Israel and Iran, Beijing stepped in, not with warships or threats, but with diplomacy calls for peace and a plan for the future. This is after the US whined about Iran's threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz and begged China to intervene and talk Iran out of it. But here's the twist: the Western analysts refuse to admit China isn't just talking about peace, it's making itself immune to war's biggest economic weapon, oil. Let's break down what really happened in the past few weeks, and why the analysts claiming China's energy security depends on Middle Eastern oil might just be stuck in 2005. So, first, the conflict. On June 13th, Israel launched an unprovoked strike against Iran, triggering a tense 12-day standoff that nearly lit the whole region on fire. And on June 22nd, the US Air Force bombed Iran's nuclear sites under Trump's orders. While the West stayed glued to its Cold War playbook, China did something different. Beijing condemned Israel's actions as illegal under international law. Foreign Minister Wang Yi picked up the phone and called for calm. President Xi Jinping backed him up with a message urging de-escalation. And at the UN Security Council, China joined Russia and Pakistan in demanding an immediate unconditional ceasefire. Iran, in turn, threatened to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway through which 1/5 of the world's oil flows. That's the kind of move that sends shockwaves through markets. Western analysts immediately sounded the alarm. China could be in trouble. It imports over half its oil from the region. They cried, but here's what they missed. While missiles were flying, China was building fast between January and May 2025. China added 198 gigawatts of solar power and 46 gigawatts of wind. That's enough clean energy to power a country the size of Turkey or Indonesia. And in May alone, 93 gigawatt of solar, almost 100 solar panels every second, and 26 gigawatt of wind, or about 5,300 turbines. Let that sink in. While the West panicked over oil choke points and military flashpoints, China installed enough renewable power to match Poland's entire electricity use in just 1 month right now. China's total solar capacity has crossed 1,000 gigawatts, half the world's total. That's not a milestone, that's a revolution. So when US officials claim China is at risk because of Middle Eastern oil, it's either dishonest or dangerously outdated. They try to guilt-trip China into talking peace to Iran for the sake of oil, without realizing that China's oil dependency is decreasing. Yes, China still imports oil, and it actually is increasing oil imports, but it's increasing green energy at a far higher pace, and that's not to mention the oil imports heavily shifted from the US to Canada, another Trump failure. This is not the China of 2010. This is a country actively building its exit from fossil fuel dependency at record-breaking speed. The data backs it up. China isn't just installing panels and turbines for show. President Xi has explicitly linked the country's economic recovery to clean energy. In April, he said China now has the world's largest and most complete new energy industry chain that's not just solar and wind. It includes battery storage, EVs, and high-voltage grid tech that makes fossil fuels increasingly obsolete. So what's really going on here? China sees stability as a prerequisite for economic growth. Unlike the US, it doesn't see the Middle East as a chessboard for regime change and arms deals. It sees it as a key economic partner and a source of energy. It's learning to live without. That's why it acts diplomatically when war looms, not militarily. But let's not pretend diplomacy is easy. Beijing's stance during the Israel-Iran conflict, condemning Israeli aggression, while staying neutral enough to talk to both sides, was a tightrope walk. And yes, its close ties with Iran make countries like Israel nervous. China signed a 25-year strategic deal with Tehran, included Iran in the belt, and Rode invited it to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and even held joint naval drills. That's what power looks like: economic reach backed by diplomatic engagement. But the West calls it bias. It complains that China can't be a fair mediator because it has too many ties to Iran. This is ironic, coming from countries that hand Israel billions in military aid while claiming to be neutral peace brokers and bombing Iran at the same time. China doesn't need to pick sides in every Western. It simply needs to protect its own interests. At the end of the day, it has to protect and provide for 1.44 billion people. And unlike India, it's doing a good job, and with oil dependency declining, its interests are no longer tied to the Strait of Hormuz the way they once were. Even during this crisis, China made sure its message was clear. Stability matters. The foreign ministry called on the international community to de-escalate and avoid broader economic fallout. That wasn't just a PR move. It was a signal China wants peace, not because it's soft, but because war hurts markets and China is a market driven in power. Here's where the analysis gets lazy. Some Western experts argue China's influence is limited because it lacks military power in the region. They say the US is still the security guarantor of the Middle East. True for now, but let's look at the trend lines. The US is busy dropping bombs and pulling out of climate agreements like the Paris Accord. Trump literally said America wouldn't sabotage its own industries to fight climate change while accusing China of polluting with impunity. Meanwhile, China is exporting more clean energy tech than any other country on Earth and installing more at home than anyone else. So, who's really leading in 2023? China helped Iran and Saudi Arabia normalize relations, a breakthrough that stunned the world. And in 2024 it mediated an agreement between rival Palestinian factions. Sure, it had help from Iraq and Oman, but who was absent? The US. That's not leadership, that's abandonment, and we see this happen a lot under Trump. And let's be honest, when American leadership means blowing up nuclear sites and dragging the world into chaos, countries will look elsewhere. China, with its calm diplomacy and massive green investments, looks increasingly like the adult in the room. Even when Chinese solar firms reported financial losses over 8 billion yuan in Q1 this year, it wasn't because the industry is failing, it's because prices are falling from extreme overproduction. That's what happens in hyper-co-competitive sectors. Growing pains, not collapse. One Chinese executive described it as a death cycle, but that's not the whole picture. This is a market correction, not an obituary. Overcapacity in China means the world gets cheaper, clean energy. That's a global good, even if local firms have to fight for survival. And let's not forget, when you're pumping out nearly 100 solar panels per second, you're not dying, you're dominating. In fact, you're helping the rest of humanity ease off fossil fuels. China is reshaping the global energy map. It's insulating itself from oil-based conflicts. It's offering diplomatic alternatives in regions the West keeps destabilizing, and it's doing all of this while cutting emissions and powering its economy with the sun and wind. This is not just smart policy, it's a global strategy. And for those still clinging to the idea that China needs oil so badly that any Middle Eastern conflict threatens its entire economy, wake up, that world is gone. A new one is being built, and it's being wired with solar panels and spinning turbines, not oil pipelines and aircraft carriers. If you enjoyed this video, then please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.